Hi everyone. So this week we looked at David Conroy's In Public Houses, and in relation to the question that was posed this week about connecting religion, specifically the Puritan religion and these taverns, and how their relationship was, as well as connecting to people and social aspects. And I think starting out in the late 17th century, these taverns started to pop up, and I think in the Puritans' eyes, they were pretty much receptive of them. They saw them as more of a social gathering rather than people getting together and drinking. I think on page 19 and 20, what surprised me was that you have these Puritan ministers publicly accepting of these taverns, and they, especially with Increase Mather and Benjamin Wadsworth, in his one of his sermons, he talked about the keeping of towers is not only lawful but also very useful and convenient, and it's there for accommodating of strangers and travelers. And so, in a sense, these taverns served as a public interaction between Puritans, and it's like kind of like a safe zone in a sense, in my eyes, that these Puritan leaders could talk with people from all walks of life, and they feel kind of in like a safe spot that they could drink and enjoy good times, but they could also bring in political talks, and they could even throw in some religious interactions with them. And I think that's where they started to overstep their welcome, in a sense, that these political leaders, or rather these religious leaders like Increase Mather and other Puritan ministers, started to feel like once they got it in, they could really start to hone on this concept of a patriarchal social order. And I think especially on page 79, it talks about a series of moves by the Assembly from 1681 through the 1710s that it widened the gap between Puritan social mores and social reality, only exposed the Puritan hierarchy of enforcement. And so I think especially with these licensing laws, especially, that serves as an example that these it these political leaders that came from Puritan belief systems, they wanted to really control the taverns, in a sense that they felt that once they could control the tavern system and drinking and the political space where a lot of these laws and courts appeared at in these public houses, that they could control a lot of society. And that's where I think you have an issue between this uh, self autonomy of Massachusetts and these other colonies and their relationship to England. And I think that's where Conroy was talking about, that these taverns and public houses represented this bigger picture, that this Republican idea was born from these taverns. And I do agree with that. And it's interesting that I didn't really see that before, in that these taverns could serve as that role. And they really did play a huge factor in religious affairs and political ideologies forming, and that even extent legal issues. Like that's where a lot of the courts happened. And you see in Sewell's diaries that he talked about these uh, affairs happening, and it um, that's where a lot of these policies took place, and especially with women's rights, especially that's where how can widows own property, and they did that through taking over their husbands' taverns when they died. And so I think a lot of these issues could come up in the taverns. And I think towards the end, even on before that quote on page 254, these Puritan rulers, they really, in quoting the book on page 254, the Puritan rulers sought to regulate taverns closely, not just to reform behavior, but also to preserve hierarchy. And I think that is really telling, in that it shows that there's this lessening of power that England has on these colonies, and the tavern served so much more than just a social gathering that people can enjoy a few drinks at and get to know other people from different backgrounds. And the another quote that I really enjoy was on page 298, and it says that from the vantage point of public houses, the social foundation and course of revolution in Massachusetts takes on a new coloration. And I think that this book really shows that these Puritans had really a big overstep in what they were trying to do in a public forum, and that these taverns served as that forum for them where they shouldn't have been able to in the first place. But I think these taverns, in a sense, they started that revolutionized feel for the 18th century. And so this book I really enjoyed reading, and it was a new lens for me to look at how politics and religion and the legal system actually worked, and they had a really early start in the the American Revolution phase. And so I hope that that this was a good discussion, and I look forward to seeing everyone else's.